Welcome to the Freedom Fridays podcast. With me, your host, Pete Clark, the Whispers guy. Work seems to expand to the time that we give it. And I've been investing my time, occasionally on a Friday, to explore how we use our time, our energy, our attention, and the impact it has on our identity. I've been exploring over season 1 some of the mindset shifts in the handcuffs of I have to the freedom of I choose to. And I've shared some conversations, some tips, some tools about how you might want to invest your own time, your own energy, your own attention. How you might want to, if you choose to, make some changes to your identity. How you might have freedom from I have to and design a life around I choose to. If that's of interest to you, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to this week's edition of the Freedom Fridays podcast, where I have a chap in front of me who we've only recently met relatively recently in our kind of careers. And he's got an interesting story about something that I think many mums and dads will be interested to talk about. So, Dan Robbins, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Dan, you've got an interesting and I think particularly relevant and passionate view on a topic. So let's get straight into it. And I'm going to ask you, you're obviously a dad, you're a parent. How passionate are you about being the best dad you can be?
Oh, like it's my number one thing, which I would hope to think most parents have the same view, and actually for me, like relatively surprisingly so, insofar as
really,
I always thought we'd have kids, and was excited to be a parent, but also knew I probably had a selfish streak in me as well, and so always, perhaps before Tilly arrived, wondered, how would it change me? I'll still be me. I'll still like have my focuses of running or work or otherwise.
Yeah.
And it's almost so cliche, but genuinely it instantly becomes your whole world, parenting and being a better parent. And it's not that everything else falls by the wayside by any stretch, because you can't, but the reason for why work and why better my career becomes the why of, well, that's providing, and that's being a good parent and not just putting food on the table, but actually showing what a good life led.
Yeah, more than that, isn't it? And we'll get to topic in a second. It staggers me, and I don't know if there's a solution to this. It staggers me that, in my view, the most important job that we ever play as parents, and I know there's plenty of people who are not parents, is being a mum or a dad or a carer or guardian, whatever. And there's literally no playbook other than our own lived experience of good and bad.
Completely.
And how come something so important to the future generations of everything is left to chance and fingers crossed? It staggers me that that's still the case.
And interestingly, I'd actually probably go a bit further than that, in that there is so much, whether it's left unknown, except for this extreme of like semi-faux science that tells you must do these, and if you don't do these 2, 3, 4 things, predominantly aimed at the mum, and particularly in those early days, that you've got it completely wrong. When actually the lived experience is, your child, at 3 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon, whatever it is, what's in front of you and what you need to solve for. And yet you'll probably actually be made to feel incredibly guilty if you don't, whether that's and on the dad's side, whether that's, in those early years, that's when I'm going to work exceptionally hard to ensure that then I'm available later in, or the flip side, actually, this is my moment and I've decided I'm going to step back from work and be really in and hands-on in those first few months or years, and then return to it. Like the expectation that other people put on you often in that is so their opinion or their faux science as opposed to what's right for you and your family.
Yeah. Look, I'm a parent to 3 older kids now, and I totally endorse that you kind of know what's right for your kid at the time, whether it's the nutrition side or the education side or the hobby side or the discipline, whatever it is, you're probably not going to get it right all the time, but there's almost this unconscious kind of bias that we have. I just kind of know that my son would prefer that, but my daughter would prefer this. And it's almost like intuitive, which kind of like goes against what I said about how come the most important job in the world has no playbook.
Yeah,
It's like,
completely.
well, because I need to be more intuitive and just kind of follow my sense. What's the right thing here?
Completely.
Dan, let's get into topic, because I think this will lead to other questions and comments and things to be conscious of. Tell us a little bit about your view about parental leave.
Yeah, one I'm certainly very passionate about, and the sort of background is, so I, along with a couple of other passionate individuals, about we're nearly getting to 7 years ago now, launched a advocacy group called Seat at the Table. Okay. Now, I'll sort of describe what Seat at the Table sort of stands for, and I should also mention in this that we've certainly gone a little bit quieter recently in a sort of post-COVID. We know people have had other things on their mind, but the basis for Seat at the Table is around ultimately helping support the closure of the gender pay gap. In Australia in particular, the gap between pay between men and women is a gap that isn't closing across industries, and it varies between different industries, but we're still at well over 100 years of closure rate that would take to actually close the gap. But we also understand that there are multitude of factors. Like, it is a very nuanced subject with lots and lots of different factors at play. But one piece of data that we found is that from a study in Sweden that found that for every month that let's sort of say the secondary carer, whether it's predominantly the sort of male, the dad, but the secondary carer takes as parental leave early on in Bub's life, in totality, the mum then stands to earn an extra 6% across her career.
Wow.
Which, that just stands out as, well, if there's an extra 6% you can put on one half of the equation, wow, like that's a real going to be a good driver towards closing that gap. And then on top of that, there's a multitude of other studies that talk to the value that comes from having a more connected father. There's a lot of research and information around the skills gap that can come through when a dad only has a week or 2 weeks or a couple of weeks, sort of off early on, and then is back in the office or back at work, leaving mum at home, doing all of the standard things of nappies and feeding and cleaning, and playing and developmental play that dad just doesn't get to do. He doesn't get to learn how to deal with a build nappy in the same way, because there's 8 to 9 hours when he's not available, and those skills gaps then just grow, and so then that becomes a misconnection that plays to the cliche of, oh, dad never cleans nappy, he doesn't know what to do. And so we're just very, very passionate, and sort of it was at the time when our daughter arrived, and I was sort of in that phase, and I was lucky enough to work for a company at the time that offered a very generous paid parental leave for both parents, which I took up, and I really saw the good and the bad in that situation, actually. So I saw the good of the connection that we had at home, the support I was able to give. Just the three that we were as a team was really special, and I think has been incredibly valuable as our daughter's grown up. On the other side of it, I also then got just the lightest taste of what mums who take their parental, obviously take their parental leave go through in terms of the quips about your holiday that you're about to have. And I worked for a very, progressive company, but it's not ideal that you're going to be off for so long. The just the little bits of like, when I return to work, what I might have missed. Actually my role was also made redundant at the end of my parental leave as well, which happens to mums all the time, like so often. And so and that's not a woe is me story by any stretch, and I wouldn't challenge that per se, but that's a lot. And so just, as I say, going through some of that experience and understanding what return to work looks like balanced with how great an experience it is of taking it. Where my passion now lies is around twofold. One, pushing businesses to improve their parental leave policies for the value for everybody that does, and for their own business of what it can drive. But then also, one of the challenges that in all of this is less about it having policy, because lots of businesses are rolling out great improved policies, be it both parents being seen as primary or at least greater secondary carer leave. But actually a big challenge is getting the dad to take it, getting dads to break the almost the stigma of, if I take the leave, then my career will be put on hold. If what will I do with my time? How will I cope? And yet, whenever you speak to a dad that's been lucky enough to be in a company that's already far down the journey and take their leave, they have a similar lived experience to me. They absolutely loved it. It's a great family experience. And whether that's just that you stay at home and you're just literally living the home group thing and doing Gymboree or rhyme time and so on, or whether you take it as an opportunity as a family to go and do a great trip, or go for a sea change or whatever. There is such a positive that comes out of it with every dad that you speak to.
Sure. Maybe a kind of double-barrel question, Dan. I'd be interested in your view. Has this happened because of the obvious reasons, the mum being the childbearer, the dad being that old paradigm? Is that just kind of a hangover of that old paradigm, and is that one of the reasons that prevents typically dads from taking any parental leave that is in the policy?
Completely. I think it's a case of most of these policies are still quite new for most businesses, so it's not the norm. They're probably more in favour of your sort of classic office job where there is equality or there's greater equality, at least in the work that's delivered. There's also then there's just that hangover stigma of mum stays home with kid, dad goes off to work in whatever format that is, whether that's pub chat ribbing or whether that's just an underlying feeling, and then particularly then career-wise of that concern that often just sits in the back of parents, which whether you're taking a couple of months, 6 months, or even a full year off, that it shouldn't be ignored. That is an extended period to be away. I mean, heck, I'm about to have 3 weeks holiday, and just in my 3 weeks holiday, there's projects that may move forward or may not, and I'm in the back of my mind, I'm a little bit just like, what if I miss out on a thing? Now, if you're a dad that's been very busy and constantly in and out and achieving, to then say, well, actually, I'm going to be off for 3-6 months. that same bubble of thought of, well, what might I miss out on? Will I still get my bonus this year because I'll be able to? I won't be able to deliver in the same way. Like they're all really fair challenges, and it's certainly not to diminish that experience and that thought process.
You might not know, Dan, but I'm going to ask anyway. Did your dad take parental leave?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Aside from the sort of probably the statutory that would have been available in the UK in the sort of 80s. So, yeah, no, I don't think for the my father's an incredibly supportive dad. I've got a sister who's a few years younger than me, incredibly hands-on, but in that 80s time, it just was far less of a thing.
It's more a philosophical question, because the question that I'm interested in discussing is, so whether your dad did or didn't, let's assume in the 80s it wasn't relevant, he didn't, do you think it's had an impact on you? And then the opposite is, well, given you've probably, I'm guessing you have taken parental leave for your youngest, what difference do you think it would make to her individually and unit?
Yeah, good question. I think so. There's a bit of a gap between myself and my sister. So I was nigh on an only child till I was well, I was an only child till I was sort of 7 or 8. And so that plays a factor in all of this. Did I do in that time and as a child lots of great stuff with my dad? Yes. Taking me to football 2 or 3 times a week, going climbing a Snowdonia and similar, all of those things. But looking back as a kid, was I through into my sins? Was I probably closer to my mum? I think so. Probably, like just in that general my mind's eye of like, who do I run to give a hug? Probably my mum. Those sort of things. I know that. Now I'm older, is that rebalanced? And undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Now, is my daughter closer to her mum or me? Probably a bit too early, but I know that we have a very close relationship, and from whether it's the cuddles or the doing stuff, I still have a busy corporate job, so and I travel in that, so I'm not around now as much as my wife is around, but I'd like to think that we are close, and a good chunk of that is from me being there in those early times, and particularly so I had 2 months, and then I had another 4 months just as she was turning 1. That was the structure of how I had my leave. And at the very, very end of that, in that 4-month bit, we did a 7-week trip where we went from Sydney to Perth in a camper van, which as a 1-year-old, she doesn't remember the specifics. She remembers the photographs. She sees the photographs, but it is an underlying core memory of just us being that family group. And so I'd probably less say it's about net. I have then a bigger relationship, but it's now as a triangle. It's as a family that I think has been the real win. And I think on top of all of that, this was obviously all pre-COVID, which then would probably set us up better to be around each other as we were a year later when COVID then hit, in that we'd had more time of me being solo, my wife being solo. We don't have a skills gap between, because we've been through it predominantly together. Now, is my wife the better parent? Undoubtedly, but that's
well, I mean, maybe.
No, she definitely is.
Yeah, I mean, my experience of that is, and it's totally unique to our sort of circumstances. And it's a data point of 1. My wife and I, as parents, play different roles. Some of which are traditional, some of which aren't. And so I don't think either of us think either one's a better parent. We just play different roles that over the years we've accepted as, this is my bit of the role and this is your bit of the role. Could we have cross functionalize that? Yes. And we've chosen not to. I guess the judgment anyone makes is, well, how have your kids turned out?
Yeah.
That's the judgment. And hence my question, and I wonder what difference it makes. Because if there's a couple of really interesting kind of provocative questions I like to ask. But first of all, is there anyone experimenting with an idea like this? And I'm coming from a place that, from all sorts of angles, consistency seems to trump intensity.
Yeah.
So if it's an intense, you get 2 months when the baby's done out, and then you get through 2 months when it's one. Is there anyone experimenting with that same time allocation? Let's spread out over 16 years. Because actually, some of the events that happen when they're 12 and they're 9 and they're 16 are so significant that with mum or dad, either primary carer is not there, I think it has as much of an impact as what happens when they're 6 months.
Yeah. The policy that I was able to use was that it was 6 months over the first 3 years of the child's life, and spread out no less than 2 months at a time. If I remember rightly, it may have changed since I've been away for 4 or 5 years. So, but I love that idea of almost long service leave style, but being able to dip into as a pool to be able to. Obviously, there'd be some probably corporate challenges to it, but that thought of, like we as having a daughter are terrified for the early teen years.
Oh yes.
Where whereas we look at friends with boys, where actually these are the intense years, the toddler years, and early school years are the intense years when they've just got like that bundles of energy and probably do need an extra pair of hands works. Whereas later, to perhaps with a girl be able to do whatever will be needed then, but more as a team. That's a really interesting idea. And I think that it comes back to your point before around, is this the hangover from just those very traditional roles? 100%. And the rollout of these policies are to rebalance that period where really parental leave is to manage for the period where baby is completely needs to be within the family nest, completely dependent. So
it's also philosophical. For me, it then gets me into this philosophical thought process around, so what's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of work? What's the purpose of parenting? As an anecdote, as my kids are older, I don't remember doing this when they were, your daughter's age. But because of my background in performance and potential, I would nudge and push and take my kids to the line and often go over it, because that's only when we know where the line is, but with an unconditional love and compassion for them as humans. But if I don't do that, I feel I'm disserving them, because they're not going to be experienced in how to deal with stuff that we know happens as adults.
Completely. And it's interesting to that point before of life changing when they arrive. For me, I've really found that the change of not only why do I work, I still have the personal ambitions that are about me and for me, and what I get out of work. But even things like running, I'm a relatively keen runner.
You're a runner.
That has changed insofar as, again, I get a lot of value out of running, mental health benefits, fitness, just the enjoyment of being out, particularly on the trails in the hills. But it's also about showing my daughter that this is exercise is good for you, and it's not just a chore. Oh, we all have to exercise, we all have to do PE. It can be really enjoyable, and you can really enjoy it, whatever that version is. My wife does Pilates. Again, she really talks up the value of how it makes her feel, that she's getting stronger. So more recently, I'm quite a keen park runner on a Saturday morning. I'm one of those. But again, not every week. It's not like Tilly has to join me every single week. And some of that's a little bit of my own selfishness, because I want to run at my pace some weeks. But
of course.
I do try and coax her to come. And and pushing her to probably at 6, maybe doing the full 5K is a push.
Yeah.
But it's the daddy thing that is good for health, good for mental. It's out in the sunshine, it's together. That's again, I think for me this all comes back to the fact that we are at that depth of our relationship this early on.
Maybe a couple of skeptical or skeptics views questions that I'd love you to how you would address these, Dan. Many people that I relate to and speak to and work with often will claim they have a fairness bias, and it seems that humans kind of sense, I don't like it, but it's fair. How do you handle the voiced or unvoiced concern from those people that either can't have kids or choose not to have kids? But there's many people in that bucket. How do you present the benefits that you get? Because again, there's a bias in even that language. How do you present your parental leave as fair to those that would love to, but I can't have kids, or but I don't want kids? So how do you handle that argument?
That's a really good one, and I think some of that you're all this into the sort of work environment of here's now going to be an extra, let's say 50% of workforce that are going to be taking multiple months off on top of what already you would at any given time have from mums taking parental leave. There is, first and foremost, there's a necessity from government to improve the support for business and the underlying what's the word, incentives to allow that the sort of cost of this doesn't then just rest wholly with businesses. So then that will allow them to then not have to wear the cost in quite the same way. And so then that isn't then just a case of, oh, well, John's about to take 6 months off. That workload will just have to get shared around the team. So that's one tranche here. And so then it starts to fall a little bit more towards like, well, it's not going to affect rest of team because we'll be able to get in a resource or we'll be able to claim the benefit. And so the books will be balanced that way. That's probably my first stand. And we're a ways away from that. The start point is predominantly businesses seeing the general corporate upside. And so,
but I'm more thinking, Dan, so
an individual
for a big corporate, great, the business might benefit, and on the book it might go, well, net, it's, we're contributing to society, it's part of our purpose, net financially, we can, blah, blah, all good.
Yeah.
And I'm in the same team as you, and I'm going, mate, I can't have kids, would love to have kids. How come you get, and it's, it's almost like it's an unfair, but it's a binary argument. How come you get 6 months off more than I do?
Yeah, no, and I think that is a really a fair challenge that I don't think I have an answer for at the moment.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to answer that.
It feels at the moment like it's probably in the similar bucket to the smoke break at a far more macro level, right? Here's a person that takes 3 times 15 minutes across the day and then goes and has lunch or whatever, and I don't smoke and I now work. How's that fair? It's in that bucket, and in all honesty, I don't have an answer outside of, I think probably as a society, as we get more inclusive of these sorts of things, there is probably a solution that somebody with a bigger brain than me could come up with that is still then useful to that individual. And I would not want to be as crass as to say, well, as well as having the parental policy, have a when you get a dog policy, or when you because quite often with corporates, that's what this gets rolled up in. And and if you're moving house, you can have a day off. These are all lovely policies, they really are. And of course, like when you get a dog, particularly a puppy, like it's a bonkers few weeks, and so being able to take that off is great, but it should definitely not be rolled up in this, because it's not like for like at all. So unfortunately I don't have an answer on it, but I think it's a really good challenge of because those people shouldn't be left out by any stretch. And and that's not just for the, well, I don't want to have kids. I see it of those, I've seen it in offices where you can almost tell when there's that either parent, male or female, and there's parent chat going on, and they just sort of curl up a little bit, the shoulders slump, and those non-parents in that way should be fully supported, of course, and this shouldn't be a divisive thing. It should be a benefit. So.
Yeah. Okay. The other, I guess, skeptics question would be, like you, I've worked for many big corporates over the years, and I work for myself, and it's certainly significantly less glamorous than is made out. Be your own boss. You've got to do everything, right? It's pretty hard. Paint this scenario for me. I'm a small business owner. It's me plus my assistant, whether that's a man or a woman or doesn't matter, and that person is allowed to take, because that's a government thing, not a corporate thing, 3 months for the first 4 years of, how do you, is there an addressable challenge to that? Because as a small business owner, I'm kind of going, well, I'm supporting my family, not even my ambition, right? Forget my ambition. Actually, I'm trying to put food on the table for my children. How is that fair? Is there a response to the practicalities of that challenge?
Yeah, for me, that's again, there needs to be a governmental support structure.
It's a corporate thing, it's a government thing.
Yeah. To extend the incentives and rebates for business to be able to support, that's the only way, for those types of economic failures, as it would be ultimately, that's the role that government plays, and that's relatively direct, but that should be the solution here. We don't really have that. We have had some extensions in the government funding, but it's not yet at the level where it would allow for likes. But for that, small business, and to be fair, to an extent, at corporate, there's shouldn't be either way. But completely known issue, definitely, of small business where it's can't just the work can't just be swallowed up by the masses, or we'll just wear it for a bit. Of course, a challenge, but that's where governmental intervention is to come, and is the case with policies that are in particularly Scandinavia. Government has stepped in and have that policy and support.
Okay. So it sounds like a really, paid parental leave for mums and dads.
Completely.
It's a really, long-term economic valuable thing to be considering. And yet, even just those two questions around fairness and small business, it seems like there's some significant hurdles to overcome.
Yeah, it definitely. And I think where we came from was, particularly in Australia, small business is obviously such a big portion of the economy. However, by pushing more and more corporates to solve and to offer, and then not just we have policy, but it's a PR thing and we just sort of keep it in the back pocket, actually, and really drive it through with dads to use and parents, and it being normalized in their businesses, that does at least make a leap forward in normalizing it across the population and moving away from what you described of the dad does one thing, mum does the other, and then also we'll then go a step forward to then creating the groundswell that can change government policy.
Okay. Dan, maybe on a slightly lighter note, what's the benefit for men? Again, I'm being really, bad around if it's the paid parental leave for dads. I know there's obviously paid parental leave for women who, all that sort of stuff. But let's go with the traditional route for a moment. I'm interested. What's the benefit for men? And I don't mean just dads. I mean men as
the role that they play or want to play? What's the benefit there? What have you enjoyed as a benefit of having?
Yeah. Well, so I'd maybe roll back to, first off, my fear was around what I'd miss out on work, taking that loss almost. And in all of this, I'd say my role was made redundant in this period, right?
Yeah.
So I had the full loss.
It's circumstantial.
Sorry.
Circumstantial. Your role was made redundant purely circumstantial.
I probably can't really go too much into the depths of it, but like a fear that I had beforehand was sort of realized at the most extreme level. All of that being said, I think often we fear we look so short term.
Yeah.
I'm going to miss out on this. Nobody wants to lose their job, of course, but I might miss out on this year's bonus, or I might miss out on that project that will then maybe help me get onto that thing that then will make me look good, and then that'll help me towards my promotion next year.
Yeah.
But we have a 40-year career, 45-year career, and actually those 2 to 3 to 6 months, overall, nothing in the scheme, very, very low weight in the scheme.
Yeah.
That is all rebalanceable and reworkable, for the opposite of yes, what did you get out of it? I got 6 months not working and paid. If nothing else, that's a real, there's so much mental health benefit in that, of just taking out of your head all the mundane doing email stuff, that then you're able to just point all of that energy into your family life.
Yeah.
So what did I get out of it? Well, we did our big trip, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
But then I also got to go to Jimbaroo and see her learning, week on week, learning the stuff. She was learning to walk at the time, and I was there. Not just coming home from work, guess what she did today? Took a step. I was actually helping her on a real core developmental thing. Some words, and yet actually in those days, because my wife was going back to work, and she was so we were also doing starting the first days at preschool. No, sorry, daycare. Sorry. So I was able to be part of that.
That solidified the family unit
completely, and even again, not having the work thing hang over my head. I did some study at that time as well.
Yeah,
there was so much value that just taking out 50 hours a week of work helped.
And look, my bias on this, Dan, would be, for me, a strong, healthy family unit is one of the bedrocks of a good life and good society. Yeah,
and I feel like we set some really good habits in place at that time. It's the time when she was moving into solids and eating, and so we were building then the bedrock of that we all eat together, and we sit around the dinner table, not every single night because there's time, but that is still a core of how we eat as a family. Not saying that needs to be everybody's, but it's those, as you say, that bedrock family unit that I think we created.
Dan, it's been fascinating for me because my kids are older, so the idea of parental leave, has passed me by. But I'm expecting at some point in the future, my kids might want to have kids, and so it becomes more and more relevant. So thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for reminding me and raising and making me aware of issues I just wasn't aware of, despite some of the huge challenges that it's faced with. I might ask you one final question. If you could offer any piece of advice to mums or dads, or primary or secondary carers, given your experience, what would the piece of advice be?
If you could maybe stretch to giving me two. The first would be...
Yeah, go on. I'll give you two.
The first would be, if your employer doesn't have policy,
Yeah.
ask, like it's an ask why not. It's a support the advocacy first and foremost.
Yeah.
Then the second is, if you're on the fence about taking it, there's only one side of the fence. It's take it, because nigh on, and I don't want to diminish people's situations or circumstances, but most situations, if you're on the fence, then probably the worst stuff, the keeping the roof over their head, the dinner on the table type stuff, is probably managed for, and you're probably okay. And all of your fears of stepping into the taking are probably just that, they're just fears as opposed to truths. And the upside of the unknown of having that time together, you only get that chance once, and it will go. And the upside is so high, and it's so good. I genuinely haven't spoken to anybody, and probably there is a bit of bias in that, but still, of their answer being, "God, so good, I loved it."
Yeah. And Dan, where can people find out more about Seat at the Table?
We have a LinkedIn page. As I said earlier on, it's a little bit mothballed for us at the moment, but there is info there.
We'll put that in the show notes to anyone who's interested in exploring.
Yeah, and also feel free to just reach out to me on the LinkedIn. Happy to have chats and go from there.
Dan, thank you. I know you've got a trip planned later on today, so good luck with the traveling, and thank you for sharing your own experience and perhaps a better way forward for us as a society, and certainly parents and families.
Hope so. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.